Now, once upon a time, I was young and lived in Copenhagen, and I was on my gap year, working as an office mouse in an office, trying to decide what to do with my life. As you do when you're young. One evening we were out partying, a whole group of us, and at 4 o'clock in the morning or something, we decided we had enough, and we went to someone's cousin's house to have to sleep, however much sleep we would get. Before we got to the sleep part, the owner, the cousin, came home. He was very tall, and he was very handsome. Wrong story, sorry, hang on. Anyway, this guy had just graduated as a chiropractor, and he was glowing. He was just so excited about chiropractic, and just, he was so keen to talk about it, and he and I sat up till whatever time in the morning discussing universal intelligence and innate intelligence and kids and chiropractic, and I knew nothing about it. So I was just like, whoa, this is incredible. So chit-chat. By the early morning, we had decided that I was going to come and observe him in practice and see what it was all about. As it was, he was actually working in a kids' practice, and he was working with the feeding problems and colic, and we didn't have ADHD back then, but allergies and those sorts of things. We probably had ADHD, but it wasn't a diagnosis. So anyway, I went to his practice the following Tuesday, and wow, that is all I can say, or all I could say. It was, wow, I had seen the light. I sold everything I had, obtained the biggest school loan in history. 2 months later, sat on a plane, going to Palmer College of Chiropractic to learn all about chiropractic care for kids. Yeah, it was awesome until I got there and I realized that I should, as per usual, probably have done just that little bit more research, because it didn't seem that this course was much about kids at all. It was, just a normal chiropractic school, learning about chiropractic and stuff. Anyway, I took whatever kids courses was coming around and made the most of living and working, or living and studying in another country. Fast forward many years, I'm in Australia, working in a family practice, and it was finally my turn to be expecting a little baby. And as you can imagine, we were super excited and really keen to provide the best developmental opportunities for our little Baba. I was going to say organic food, that didn't really exist back then, but good food, regular exercise, lots of sleep, lots of adjustments, trying to provide the best opportunities for our little baby. And it paid off. I had a fantastic birth. No complications. My daughter was adjusted. We went home. Everything good until we got home. That's when things got a bit challenging. My daughter had trouble breastfeeding. She had very low muscle tone. She couldn't lift her head when she was lying on her tummy. She didn't move much. She slept through at 3 weeks. It was no good. She was late learning to roll. She was late learning to crawl. She was late learning to walk, run, ride the bike. And when she started school, she had trouble reading. She had trouble with maths. She had trouble with friendships. It was a tough time obviously because I was concerned about my daughter. We were concerned about our daughter. But I had a bit of challenge to my faith in chiropractic. We were obviously full of shit because we had done all the right things with adjusting it, and it didn't seem to matter who adjusted her. It wasn't just me or my husband that were crap chiropractors. It was all the chiropractors that were crap, because it didn't make any difference to my daughter's ability to succeed in life. So my practice was suffering. I didn't see very many people, so our finances were struggling. As I say, at home we were trying our hardest to get our daughter to be her best, but nothing really seemed to help. So at this time, as Mary Ellen was said, I've somehow stumbled over the primitive reflexes, And I know that you guys are going to sit there and say, yeah, stumble over the primitive reflexes. How can you miss them? But this is back in the 90s, and it was just, coming out. But anyway, learned about the primitive reflex, and it was like, whoa, this is really interesting. I got super excited and learned lots of stuff. That was basically, a turning point for me. It's like, I have to know more about how little brains develop and how I can make a difference to a little brain. So I learned new chiropractic techniques that I had not been taught at Parma. I learned about primitive reflexes. I learned about brain stimulating exercises. I learned about nutrition. I learned about all this amazing stuff. And it was just so incredible because it made a difference. And she got so much better. So she went from strength to strength. Her physical expression improved. Her school improved. Her academic performance, her friends' life just got so much better and so much easier. And I was so inspired. As so many of us, a challenging personal journey like that is what makes us passionate about what we do. So this experience built my kids' practice. And it taught me so many new things. And it got me from that little shell of, I'm petrified of public speaking, into making a switched on kids program that I've been teaching now for 20 years and standing on stages like this, which is petrifying, still petrifying. But anyway, here we are. That is nothing against the importance of getting the message of chiropractic out into the community. Now, it was about this time I met Heidi at a conference in Australia, a big conference. We were in the green room, which was actually a very dark hallway, waiting to be mic'd up to go and speak at this conference. And Heidi, I think this was very early in her speaking career as well, and we were discussing how scared we were of getting up there. And of course, 2.5 seconds later, Heidi's up there in the spotlight, F-bombs flowing left, right, and center, and looking as if she was born on the stage, right? It was like she was having a wonderful time. I don't remember performing quite that well. This was also a time where, at least in Australia, chiropractic care for kids were going through a really, really tough time. It seemed like, according to the media, we were killing babies about every second month or so. I went through more than a year in my practice where I did not see a baby that was not referred in from someone else in my practice. So we were being hammered left, right, and center. And I spent hours, nights, lots of time just agonizing over how can we go, how can we stop this continual attack from the media? What can we do? How can we change this? This is too important to just sit back and take these, there's no real truth in them, but these are the attacks that were happening all the time. And I decided after lots of contemplation that research might be our best way out of this challenge. So I thought, okay, well, I'll get together with all my hotshot chiro friends, some of them in this room today, and it's like, okay, well, we need to raise some funds for research. And we had some meetings, and we sat around and patted each other on the back and said, okay, well, we're going to run a conference, and we'll raise some funds, and we can get some research into chiropractic care for kids. But as often happens when there's lots of cooks in the kitchen and no one taking leadership, that is definitely my issue. It sort of fizzled, nothing happened, and we still got attacked by the media. About a year later, I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I just thought, I don't swear, but if I had been Heidi, I'm channeling Heidi, I just thought, for fuck's sake, how hard can this be? Seriously, all I need is, a few people to volunteer to come and talk. I just need an event up in a hotel somewhere, and then we just invite a few people to come in, and we'll raise tons of money, and it'll be fantastic, and we can support research. So the next morning, in my excitement, I call Heidi, and Heidi doesn't necessarily, at this point anyway, know me particularly well, but I was like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and I was super excited, and Heidi was maybe, she was reasonable and sensible, and she just let me talk, and she was a little bit like, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. But she was very gracious. She said, okay, if you can, get this up and running, I'll come and speak. I was like, great, fantastic. This is 10 years ago, people. This was how the Kids Summit was born. And I am so proud of what we have achieved. And it's not just me. Julia Wren has been there right from the start. Felicity Cook, Vanessa Barry, Nimrod has been godsend, as has lots and lots of other people. We have raised over $400,000 in those 10 years and managed to get some research runs on the board in ADHD, in cerebral palsy, autism, what adjustments do in children, and this particular study that we're funding now, which is about chiropractic care in infants. So super excited. We have been able to create connections between chiropractors across the globe. Different relationships have, flowered. We have helped educate hundreds of chiros and hopefully helped the health of thousands of children in the process. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. However, unfortunately, I am not sure that we are really making inroads into the community. From what I can tell, we still only see, I have to make sure I get this the right way around, 8% of our practice load, if we're looking across the world, is under 18. And that has not changed at all in the last 10, 20 years. Now, I know that some of you are from Denmark and you're going to sit there and say, rightly so, 60% of of infants under 1 get checked by a chiropractor in Denmark, which is fantastic. But then they disappear completely and do not show up until they're 15, and they come in with neck pain and headaches and back pain, just like their parents. So we're not making enough of an inroad into children. In Australia, we still, well, I should say, again, prohibited from manipulating children under the age of 2. Despite the Safer Care Victoria review, which I'm sure you would have heard about a couple of years ago, 2019, they found that we were safe, we were trusted, and we were very much appreciated by the community. We had no restrictions, we were fine. However, the media kicked up a stink again, and the ban was reinstated, which is, devastating. Not that we can get around it, but still, we don't want a ban on our name. Again, education, at least in Australia, there's very little pediatrics. It seems to be mainly red flags that are being taught to the students, which means that we have chiropractors entering our workforce who cannot take care of every person that shows up in their practice. And if that's the case, how high is the risk of someone who doesn't know what they're doing potentially hurting a little one? This probably means that the registration boards are going to create some sort of postgraduate requirement where you can't see kids unless you've taken extra education, which is not really what chiropractic is all about, where we are checking people of all ages who has a spine and a nervous system. Political correctness. I'm not sure what happens in the rest of the world, but in Australia, I'm finding that more and more people are actively choosing not to see kids. It is that whole thing of evidence-based. It is not evidence-based to see kids, so I will stick to neck pain, back pain, and headache. And then there's the other group of people who are saying, well, I'm in family care and I'm in kids care and I run a different type of practice. And we spend all this energy infighting and backstabbing and turning each other in for things that we've done wrong. Whereas really we should spend that energy on getting the chiropractic message out into the universe, community maybe. I can go on to the gender gap. Now I'm looking at this room and there's lovely men, and I really appreciate that you're here, but most of us are still female. And I think that's how it is. Most of the people that are taking care of children are female. It's also the females who tend to stay at home and take care of their children in their best possible way, with home-cooked organic meals and nature play and homeschooling. And I'm not in any way saying that that's wrong. I'm saying that's amazing. But when you then try to run a little practice on the side, I understand that young female chiropractors are exhausted and overwhelmed. And then you come to places like this and you think, oh my goodness, I need to learn more. I need to do a master's degree. When am I going to fit this in? And then, of course, that also means that we're exhausted. We don't raise our hands to speak at events such as these. We don't raise our hands to get onto the committees, which means that our voices will not be heard. So kids, again, become a lower priority. Okay, I'm sure you're saying this is so negative, can you stop? And I will stop, but I will just remind you that the losers in this game are the little ones. The little ones who do not get a second chance to develop as well as they possibly can unless we get our hands on them. When you think of the long-term sequelae of colic, attention problems, behavior problems, sleep problems, bonding problems that are with these children for the rest of their lives. Think of developmental skills. Each developmental milestone is built on a skill that we've had before. It depends on the quality of the skill before. So if we don't have adequate skills from the start, we end up with a nervous system that's not working as well as it can. We have to do this. We have to get out there. So I try to pretend to be a politician, and I've come up with a 9-point plan. This is very, very good. Vote for me. First of all, what I'd like you to do is to grab your phones. Take them out of your bags, please. I know that they're all on silent. What I want you to do is to take a photo of me up here with the Kids Summit in the background. Okay. I love being a model. Now, what I want you to do now is to tag the Kids Summit, tag Dorte, Bladt, Cairo, and go on your favorite social media platform. And some of us are pulling faces. I love that. What's a social media platform? And put in the caption, at the Kids Summit, you should be here. Because where are your friends? Where's your tribe? We're trying to raise funds here, people. And it's lovely to see you, but we want more people. And we need to spread the word. So please put that onto your social media right now and then put your phones somewhere else. Okay, number 2, see more kids in your practice. Do not schedule your kids at a different time to the rest of the people in your practice. Make sure they're in between so people recognize and realize that seeing kids is a normal thing for a chiropractor to do. Don't neatly pack the toys in the corner. Have them spread all over the place so people can see that there's been kids in and out of this place, and it's a welcoming family place. When you're in practice or when you're adjusting an adult, ask them, so when did your child last get checked? Or who is your child's chiro? What we're trying to do is to make it a normal thing that they get checked. And maybe, depending on where you practice and if this is possible, give them a complimentary assessment for their child's first visit. That might just get them over the hard yard, because the first visit is always more expensive. When you're checking kids, adjust for optimum health. Don't just chase the symptoms. We are experts in child neurological motor development, and we can go in and check for issues way before they become symptoms. Let's use our expertise and make sure that we get the next generation to be as healthy as they possibly can be. Foster relationships with your colleagues. We're all in the same boat. Invite people around for a cup of tea at your house. Go out for dinner. Maybe even just give them a call. Are you okay? Many of us are in little silos. We're lonely. We need someone to connect with that sort of have the same values as we all do. And continuing in that thought, connect with other professionals that have the same sort of values as you do. Again, and go out and have a cup of tea. Invite them to an informal networking session at your practice. Make sure that when you connect with these people, that you communicate in how can I refer to you? What can I do to help you? When you think of these people, they will have the same work-life balance issues as you do. They will have the same financial challenges. They will have the same issues with, now I'm looking at the people from Australia, the APRA, challenges that we have. It's probably similar in your country, that you have some registration rules that are sometimes a bit silly. voice your expertise to a bigger group of people in your community. You could do talks in your practice about tummy time or school lunches or developmental milestones in children. You can do it at the local school, you can do it at the local soccer club, you can do it in the swimming club. Maybe talk about concussions, maybe talk again about what normal development is like. Talk about screens, the challenge that screens creates to a nervous system. And I wanted to say, and talk at events such as these. Put your hand up and volunteer your expertise. Never stop learning. The world out there, or the knowledge base is so vast and it changes so quickly. And we really need to stay on top of that as much as we possibly can. Both because it keeps us interested in our profession and it keeps us engaged in our profession, but also because it keeps us interesting. So people come in and use us as a resource. Again, we know so much, but we need to make sure that we don't know what was the fact in 1984. And volunteer. For example, at the Kids Summit. I don't know what you know. You might have some excellent information that you can share with us. Volunteers help us for the UCA. Get involved in whatever you can, but get your name, get your person out there. The more you actually give to your community, the more people are going to respect and engage with you. And then lastly, at events such as these, for example, dig deep. Seriously, do not whinge at the cost of registration. It is cheap as chips. I just want to remind you that the speakers who are up here on stage have traveled. They're paying their own way. The hotel is their own way. The food is their own way. We are trying to raise funds so we can donate money to get more research into the work that you do every day. So help us do that as much as you can. Now, I admit my limitation. I only know what I know, and I'm hoping that you can help us get chiropractic out to the community, get the chiropractic out to kids in your community. So what I'd like you to do is to grab your piece of paper there that you have in front of you and your pen, and I just want you to brainstorm with me or for me for the next 3 minutes. What I'd really like to know is, what do you think we can do to get chiropractic into our community better than we're doing at the moment? Is there a better way to raise funds for chiropractic care for research? Is research our best option? Do you have any ideas as to how can we make a difference in this world? Don't worry too much about the spelling. Doesn't matter, we can understand it. But if I can just give you a couple of minutes just to think of that. And if you want to add on the bottom, if you have a skill, if you have an idea, if you want to speak, put your name on the bottom of that piece of paper. Fold it, just put it in the front of your table, and we'll pick it up later. You've got 3 minutes. You've got about 30 seconds to go. I'm not quite sure if that was 3 minutes, but that's as long as I can be quiet. Oh, the Kids Summit, sorry. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Okay, I'm changing tack completely. I'm going to speak really fast now because, of course, I've spent too long on this. This was supposed to be 15 minutes, but not quite. What I want to do is to talk about a group of people in my practice. Usually, they're about 8 years old. They don't get, no, hang on. They're 8 years old, beautiful. They are friendly, they're happy, gorgeous, very considerate little people. They usually come in because their teacher has finally picked up that they're struggling with reading. The parents will often have thought about the reading issue for probably a couple of years, but the teacher said, don't worry about it. It'll click soon. They'll get it. They'll get that reading thing. But for some reason, or for some reason, these kids, it just never clicks. Which then means when they're 8 years old, they come in and they're a bit sad. They feel really dumb. They feel slow. They feel left out. They're starting to get quite a challenge with their self-esteem. And as you can probably guess, we're talking about kids with dyslexia. Dyslexia is the primary diagnosis in the DSM-5 diagnostic book called Specific Learning Disorders. Specific learning disorders affect somewhere between 15 and 20% of the population, depending on who you read, where dyslexia counts for somewhere between 5 and 17%. 35% of kids with specific learning disorder do not finish high school. So it is incredibly important that we get to these kids while we still have a chance to make a difference for them. Now, I'm going to talk about dyslexia, not reading, but I thought it was worth just putting this little slide in. Literacy skills have declined significantly over the last 10 years, particularly since the COVID lockdowns, to the extent that Martin West, he's a professor in education at Harvard University, and he's come up with these stats that 40% of year 4 kids have trouble with reading, and 33% of year 8 kids. This is not what I want to talk about, but I just want you to know that there is a decline in reading across the board, but just the fact that they struggle with reading doesn't necessarily mean that they've got dyslexia. Dyslexia is a neurological language base. Sorry, I'm just going to mess this up a little bit because if not, I'll have to turn around. There we go. It's a neurological disorder of the written word. Despite what many parents think, it's not about letter reversals. Letter reversals is a normal developmental phase up to about age 7. That being said, if the kid still reverses letters and symbols after 7, there is a higher likelihood of them being diagnosed with dyslexia. So these kids, they have normal IQ, they are not lazy, they are not necessarily, as I say, they're not slow, they're not homeschooled, they don't have issues with their eye function or their ear function, they don't have an intellectual disability. It is an unexpected challenge with reading. There's a huge variety in symptoms. It can be letter reversals, it can be just problems with reading, but overall it has been found that they have slow processing speed and poor working memory. And importantly, they do not grow out of dyslexia, but often the kids will find ways of managing their world and actually in a very successful way, doing life and even written language. It is more common in boys. It is thought that intrauterine exposure to stress hormones and testosterone may cause some challenges to the brain, and it's also thought that estrogen is somehow protective for these kids. As I said, intelligence is normal, but not on a normal IQ test because it's usually a written test. But if you actually assess their intelligence in other ways, these kids are really, really smart. Comorbidity is normal. Most notably, 20 to 40% have ADHD, 30% have autistic spectrum or are on the autistic spectrum. So it's a phonological processing and single word reading network challenge. And what they basically have issues with is converting a sound to a symbol to a sound, and the rules around the written language, such as, when do you have to put a comma and when do you put, my husband's in here, I can't put a comma for the life of me, capitalization issues and their issues with writing. But on top of that, they also have issues with organization, they have issues with time management, they often have, they're often developing challenges with their social and emotional health, mainly because they're feeling, I think mainly because they're feeling a little bit slower than everyone else, so they pull back and are not emotionally as healthy as they could be. They've got some really strong sides as well though. They're very creative, they're really good at visualizing in 3 dimensions, they're very strong in their non-verbal cues and their empathy. They have excellent long-term memory, there's no issues with that. And they can usually argue their way out of any sort of challenge. So they might not be able to write it down, but they can definitely think it through. So reading is actually really interesting. We don't really know what it is. All we know is that reading is not innate. We know that reading doesn't take place in any particular area in the brain. It is actually a neuroplastic tool that we have developed over so many years. It happens in different parts of the brain. We know that people with dyslexia have issues with seeing more letters in one go, whereas I imagine you have all seen this slide going around on social media, and I expect none of us will have any issues actually reading it, because our brains sort of predict what's going on and we don't really care what order the letters are in. So we can see what it says, but a dyslexic person will probably not. So normal reading and normal reader will fixate on 3 to 6 letters, and then on soft focus add another 15. And then we glide along the script. We don't actually read the letters in the words. We just glide over, we forget all the little words, so we might only see about 2/3 of the words on the page. This doesn't happen in a dyslexic person. They can't they can't softly focus over such a large area. They have to do much smaller areas. They spend much more time on each letter sequence. And then what often happens is that they've forgotten what just came before, so they're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So reading is it's a tough, much tougher journey than for the typical reader of the Western language. And then you may ask, hey, what's causing it? And that is the million-dollar question, because no one actually really knows. There was a review and meta-analysis by Munzer done in 2019, and she said that over the past 30 years or so, there have been 4 main theories into what causes dyslexia. The phonological disorder has to do with phonemic awareness, so hearing the sounds in the words and being able to put the sounds together. This theory also talks about the difficulty with accessing and retrieving sounds and symbols from working memory. That's one theory. Another theory has to do with the magnocellular cells in the retina, which you will remember is sort of seeing in much more broader terms, and then directing the Pavlov cells to what is interesting on the page or interesting in the vision. If we don't have the magnocellular system working, we can't glide. We actually get stuck in the individual letters. The visual spatial attention system has to do with the attention that we place on each letter or each symbol, which then is, the attention is slowed down. So again, we have difficulty with gliding over information and remembering what came before. So it's mainly like a processing disorder. And then lastly, the cerebellar dysfunction, which has to do with the automation of reading, where in dyslexic kids it doesn't happen as well. Interesting about these 4 theories is that you can see that they were all around the year 2000. And since then, we've developed some much more amazing imaging techniques and none have actually been able to reproduce the early research into this, which doesn't mean that these theories are wrong. It just means that it's not one of them that is correct. It might be a combination of lots of different ones, and it might be different in each child or each adult. Other theories around is the hemisphericity, where dyslexia is seen as less connection and less function in the left hemisphere. The trouble with this is the comorbidity, that there's such a link to ADHD and autism, and that is usually seen as a dysfunction in the right hemisphere. So if this is the main reason, then there would have to be a dysfunction on both sides of the brain, which we know is probably not the case, as these kids are actually functioning really well. They have a great IQ, and they are not necessarily developmentally delayed. So again, hemisphericity may not be the only reason. It could be part of the reason. We know that there's abnormal structures in the corpus callosum, structural development in the corpus callosum in kids with dyslexia. We know that there's issues with rapid auditory processing, or that's another theory, that they basically have slower processing speed and can't remember what has happened prior on the page. There are several genes involved in dyslexia, mainly in neuronal migration and connection across different sections of the brain. And then lastly, the temporal coherence in the visual and the auditory cortex. You will remember from school how the motor system sort of switches on and switches off at a certain rate. This is to save energy in the nervous system. This is controlled by the cerebellum and is upgraded in the basal ganglion and the thalamus, so it can actually fire into the cortex. Now, what happens if we have abnormal oscillations, no, I shouldn't say abnormal, but not the same synchrony of oscillations on both sides of the body or both sides of the brain? It means that there's not as perfect connection across the midline, which actually means that generally when we hear in the right ear and we interpret in the left temporal lobe. So that information doesn't actually get across, it doesn't reach the left temporal lobe. So the theory is that dyslexic kids actually don't hear the short sounds or the start of sounds, and therefore they can't put a symbol to it because they can't hear it, they don't know it's there. So interesting theory, because again, it's something that we can do something about. Going back to that review, they're talking about at 2019, what we know is that reading takes place in resting state networks, so separate areas, particularly on the left side of the brain, and that these are connected into hubs. Left temporal, parietal, occipital area is what they have found to be mainly involved in reading. Interestingly though, in dyslexia, we find that there is less information, there's less integration of information across those hubs, so between the resting state networks. There is a decrease in neuroplasticity across both sides of the brain, not just the left. And there are structural changes in the corpus callosum, but in other areas on the brain, including the right side in the attentional networks. So I guess what I'm trying to say is we can't just focus on the left. With dyslexia, most of us will see these kids, and there will be an issue for the teachers once they sort of swap from learning to read to reading to learn. So they're about 8 years old. But research actually suggests that it happens much, much earlier. So in this particular study, they found that newborns have different pitch processing. So right from the word go, they are not hearing certain sounds or maybe the start of sounds. Other research has looked at speech development and found that dyslexic kids speak as their peers up to about the age of 2, maybe 2.5. Then from 3, 3.5, they have different vocabulary, they have less vocabulary and different syntax to their peers. So again, saying that it's not just, it's not something that develops once they start reading. Testing is usually done by an educational psychologist. They will do cognitive testing, cognitive testing, literacy skills, and looking to see whether there is an intellectual disability. However, learning is not just a brain thing. The brain is not an isolated entity. It is linked to the body. We know that development comes particularly in early life from vestibular stimulation and proprioceptive stimulation. So this interesting study looks at kids with dyslexia and specific learning disorders, and they've found that there is balance issues, coordination issues, dexterity and stability issues in these kids. And interestingly, that is where we fit in. Is there something kids don't need? It is another intelligence test. It is another reading test. But what we do, we specialize in neuromuscular function, right? So what we can actually do is to go in and test a child's fine motor skills, gross motor skills, cerebellar function, balance, posture, and assess how the brain is working from there. Now, I'm going to be talking about this later on today when we're doing the workshop, but I thought I'd just show you a couple of things. This is a synopsis of the assessment that I do at home, so you're welcome to download it when I have a dyslexic kid in the practice. One test that works really, really well for eye function, and I'm sure you all know this is sort of a cerebellar test. You are in front of the child. I have this funny posture because I'm standing like this to down to her. And you get the child to look at your nose, and you hold your fists up. And then you instruct the child to look at the thumb or towards the thumb that you're raising. You then do a random lifting. You don't want to do left, right, left, right, left, right. You want to do left, left, right, right, and left, right, do whatever. But anyway, the point is that the parietal lobe will shoot the eyes towards the thumb, and the cerebellum will stop the eye gliding. So if the child overshoots or undershoots, we know there's something happening with the cerebellum. We know that adjustments help the cerebellum. Fine motor skills, you can put beads on a string, you can pick up paper clips, or this test where you can, I should really be able to play the video, but might just save a little bit of time here. You get the child to touch each individual finger to the tip of their thumb. You want to make sure that it's just the tip and they actually make a little circle. You don't want it to be flat because you don't want them to have that much sensory input. So you just look at the smoothness of movement, and that indicates their fine motor skills. Thinking of the processing speed and the memory, I usually use little blocks, but I didn't have any when I had was playing with my niece. You have 5 identical blocks, cards, whatever, and then you do a pattern of touching these depending on the child's age. So with this one, I might do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can touch the same one. She has to go and do exactly the same thing. And what we're looking at is how well does her short-term memory work from her visual input. And you can do the same with auditory, where you're repeating a sequence of numbers, and then they have to repeat. The important thing about repeating numbers is that you have to say 5, 9, 2, 6, 3, and not 5, 9, 2. Now I can't remember what it was, 6, 2, 3. You don't want to make it into a phone number. You want them to be able to remember sort of a boring sequence. Again, going back to the review, they're saying there's only one thing that works, only one thing that's evidence-based, and that is basically extra time at school, looking at manipulating sounds into syllables and words, putting symbols to them, and then reading. That's the only thing that works. According to the American Dyslexic Association, 90% of children will catch up with their peers if this is caught in year 1, whereas if we don't catch it till year 3, they do not catch up. It states in a whole section by itself, there is no evidence for Erlen lenses, there is no evidence for vision therapy, there is no evidence for chiropractic. We are mentioned by name. And you know what? They're right. There is basically no evidence to support chiropractic care making a difference in dyslexia. However, Yeah. However, no evidence is not the same as not being effective, right? It just means that no one has taken the time to do studies like this. So what I would like to argue is, if we follow the train of thought that I've tried to start through here, is think about retained primitive reflexes. We can test these. What does a reflex mean? A reflex means that there's no inhibition of the cortex of the brainstem. If there's no inhibition of the cortex, well, we know that cortex is probably not working as well. If the cortex is not working, well, of course they can't work, bloody read, right? Can chiropractic make a difference in retained primitive reflexes? Absolutely. This is the stuff I teach in my Switched On Kids programs. This is the stuff that I teach in my Practice Pro coaching programs. This is the stuff that you will probably learn from all the speakers this weekend. Hemisphericity. If we have one side of the brain working better than the other, what do? We adjust so we stimulate for that side of the cortex. That works really well. Chiropractic works for that too. Cerebellum, we know that chiropractic influences the cerebellum. We know that when the cerebellum works better, it upregulates better, so we get better oscillations across the cortex. You will remember Martin McPhillips, I'm sure. Martin McPhillips did a lot of research on retained primitive reflexes back in the 90s. And one particular study he did looked at dyslexic children, their reading ability, and then doing exercises only for the reflexes. And he found that their reading ability improved. So doing those sorts of exercises worked really well. And then we have the support of meta-analyses, systemic reviews such as these, that have found that when we give exercises to children, which, I mean, we don't necessarily have to do the exercise, but we do impact the motor control with our care. It improves cognitive skills, it improves attention, it improves academic performance, and it improves their motor skills. So again, going a roundabout way, we can make an impact into these children's brains. Now, I realize, of course, that I don't have any evidence for this, but I have seen hundreds of kids over my 36 years in practice. And I wanted to just finish up with a little story about Chris. Chris was 8 years old when he came in to see me. Mum had been concerned about his reading ability for quite some time, probably since kindergarten. But now in year 2, the teacher's saying, hey, something's wrong. We need to step up, get something happening here. Anyway, the mum decided, okay, well, we'll try chiropractic and see how that works. So Chris at this time, as I say, have issues with reading, he has issues with maths, and just in this past recent time, his emotional health, his mental health has really decreased. So he's feeling like the kids don't like him, his peers don't like him, he feels like he's really stupid, so he doesn't play with the kids in the playground, and he's pulling back from his friends, so he's a sad little guy. He shows up in my practice, we do an assessment like I showed you, started adjusting him, and just plodded along. About a month into his care, he didn't show up. He was usually at 7:30 in the morning before school, and this day he didn't come, and we were like, this is so unusual. Let's give him a ring. And so the CA rings him, and they rescheduled him for 11:30, and 11:30 comes around, and in comes Chris. He looks horrible. Dark circles around his eyes, pasty white face, just can hardly drag himself into the practice. What happened was that at 8 o'clock the night before, it clicked. And he could read. And he got so excited that he insisted on reading the whole Dr. Seuss series that I had at home, and I didn't finish till 1 o'clock in the morning. So he was excited, but a little bit tired, didn't go to school that day. Now, chiropractic may not fix